I bring up the next speaker. If you are part of the AFC chapter here that volunteers to keep this chapter going, and we're also part of organizing this event, can you just raise your hand, please? Can we recognize these people? So AFCIA is the largest professional association for the defense industry in the world. It has 135 chapters, and these people do this in addition to as a volunteer, in addition to their day job. And the whole purpose is to have this ethical dialogue between government, industry, and academia, so we as a country can increase our posture of national defense and remain dominant in this global competitive environment. And most of us know that our biggest threat is coming from the People's Republic of China, and it's no joke. We don't want them encroaching into the Pacific, and the conversations we're having here with each other impact that. So, talking with our next speaker, it's a pretty impressive technical bio. I will read this to you. It's very short, but I'll tell you, Chris and I got a chance to talk. And he started out his career as a teenager as an enlisted person in the Navy, which I think is pretty cool. And then he ended up going to the Naval Academy and has more military experience as an officer, and has been in this environment supporting our nation his whole adult life, which I think is pretty cool. And we shared a lot of common interests in the things that we enjoy, being married with children.
We'll go that far.
So, anyways, and the other thing I'll add before I read his bio to you is that as we were talking, I have a background as a Army Ranger and a skydiver. I have 6,000 jumps, and Jeremy Fisher and I both were Army Special Ops. I started out, Army Ranger, Army Pathfinder. And parachute cord is a great example of us being here. We call it 550 cord, and it has actually 8 parts to it. There's the outer sheath that holds the inner 7 strands together. And so things like this pull us together like that outer sheath, this parachute cord, and the 7 strands bind us together and make us stronger. And that's what this event is about. The industry people hope to win some work because they're in business to be in business. They employ people who want to stay employed. And but most of us actually care about the mission of DoD and the people that are government people here that are living your job, trying to keep our nation's defense going and dominant. So thank you for all that you do. So without further ado, Chris Cleary is the Vice President of Global Cyber Practice at ManTech International. Prior to returning to his commercial roots, he served as the Department of the Navy Principal Cyber Advisor, PCA. I don't know what that means, but I think it's a big deal.
It's the only role the service has had thus far,
I'll
correct?
get it. You'll hear.
All right. So he's kind of a big deal. Okay? He was. You are, Chris. He was responsible for advising the Secretary of the Navy, sounds like a big deal, Chief of Naval Operations, Commandant of the Marine Corps, and implementing Department of Defense cyber strategy, more big deal stuff, within the Department of the Navy. Prior to being appointed as the PCA, he was the DON Chief Information Security Officer, that also sounds important, and Director of the DON CIO Cybersecurity Directorate. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Chris Cleary.
Sure, yeah. All right, but first of all, thank you for having me. I've given this talk a couple times, even recently, and what it turns out to be is much more of a stream of consciousness than anything else. I'm going to tell a couple funny stories. I'm going to rant a lot. I'm going to reflect on my past at the Pentagon, which, if anybody has an opportunity to work at the Pentagon, you should absolutely do that. You should leave this area, you should move to DC, you should deal with an hour and a half of traffic going both ways. And work at the Pentagon. It's an awesome, awesome experience. So thank you for the intro. Yes, my last job was as the Principal Cyber Advisor for the Department of the Navy. A lot of my comments are going to reflect on basically what I learned over those 4 years. I'm currently with ManTech. And the intro sort of set me up pretty nice because what I'm not going to do is apologize for my stripes. And what is that? I've basically been in the military in one way, shape, or form my entire adult life. I'm a classically trained military officer. What I mean by that, I went to boot camp, Naval Academy, War College. All my education has come in one way, shape, or form from Uncle Sam. And my head has been shaved 3 or 4 different times. And I talk Clausewitz, and I use movie references, and all the things that we've done in foxholes and Time to Kill in our respective environments. And so again, you'll feel that as we go through this. All right. The audience for the last talk I gave was this. Just look at that. The point is, this is no longer an academic exercise. I steal that line from the Hunt for Red October when Jack Ryan and Admiral Greer are walking into the Pentagon and the Red October is sailed and Admiral Greer turns and looks at me and goes, this is no longer an academic exercise. The submarine put to sea. When you look at things like the adversaries doing in our critical infrastructure, Volt Typhoon, the stuff they were doing down in Guam, I had a little bit, that kept me up some nights. This is no longer a thought experiment. We're not theorizing about what the adversary could potentially do to us in this space. There were needs for cybersecurity and zero trust and RMF and CMMC, and again, I have my opinions on all of those. Some good, some bad. So I'm not saying I'm not advocating or endorsing all that stuff. The point is, this has gotten real, very fast. And what's unfortunate, for lots of reasons it's unfortunate, is when we see current events going on in this world that have gone kinetic very, very fast, it once again takes sort of the emphasis and the attention away from some of the things that live in the non-kinetic world. All right, what did I learn in my last job? As the Principal Cyber Advisor, you had to figure out a way to give information to people that A, didn't understand, or in some sense B, didn't care about this space. Pilots, submariners, infantry marines, people that had real day jobs. And now you had to kind of explain to them, hey, why is cyber important? And again, I'm not going to use the word cyber security, because one of my big pet peeves is every time we say the word cyber, 99.9% of the time it's followed by the word security, which all of a sudden makes it a zero trust conversation. For the Department of Defense, all of a sudden makes it a Microsoft Defender conversation. Somebody says we wrote a check to them already and the conversation's over. I said, well, no, stop. There's other things we have to do in this space. So what I did is I formulated what I called the 3 questions. There's some funny sea stories behind that. I'll get into that in a second. But this was the way that I had to try and sell what we were doing in cyber to whoever I was talking to. And the first question was obvious. Say, hey, is cyber a warfighting domain? And of course, whoever I was talking to, whatever uniform they were wearing, man or woman, enlisted officer, SC, it didn't matter. They'd go, Chris, of course cyber is a warfighting domain. Of course it is. Thank God the principal cyber advisor's here. Thank God for you and being employed in that position. It's exactly what we need. And they'd say, great, we all agree that it's a warfighting domain. My next question is, well, then is it going to be a core competency of our service? Well, it's important, Chris. I'm not going to, it's absolutely important, but, and all this, again, this is not unique to the Navy. All the services have similar comments around this. You know, the Air Force builds the B-21 Raider and the Joint Strike Fighter. The Navy's got submarine problems, if you've been looking at the news recently with welds and, but look, we got some problems. Yes, cyber is important. Core, we're working on it. We're trying to get there. Because where I thought I could take this conversation at the time was, because I came from Leidos, another defense contractor, I was chasing the chick with the Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture. And for those of you who are familiar with that program, you know that the Army and the Air Force are executive agents for components of it. And I'm like, hey, it's time to get the Navy into the game. Navy or Marine Corps. Hey, we'll be the executive for tools and weapons. Why? Well, we had the Cyber Warfare Engineer, we had the Naval Cyber Warfare Development Group, we just built a brand new cyber building at the Naval Academy. Let's take a leadership position. So when I came up with these 3 questions, that was my end state at the time. But because we couldn't get past question number 2, you never even got to question number 3. How are we going to take a leadership in an environment that we don't consider a core competency of our service? Now, I say that a little more aggressively than I would have said it a year ago, because I might have been murdered a year ago for saying these things. But I'll say that there's no media in the room. Anyways, I've said that publicly other places, so we'll go on with that. But why? Why was it not a core competency in the Navy? And this goes back to, again, for those war college graduates, for those people who are familiar with deterrence theory and the 5 C's of deterrence, as reflected by these 5 C words on the slide. Capacity and capability. Do I have something and do I have enough of them? Do those things work? i.e., are they credible? Am I committed to use them, and have I communicated that fact to you in the past? Most weapon systems can establish the 5 C's of credibility. We're seeing it in the Gulf right now with us firing SM-3s of drones and having ships on station. We are a very credible force, as the first speaker referenced. Yeah, we are a very credible lethal force, and we show that every day. But when it comes to cyber, I would argue we haven't demonstrated credibility in this space yet. This is me coming back to industry. So when industry would come talk to me, or now that I'm at industry again, or when I was in industry before, I'd say, industry, if you could make this credible, I can then champion this around and get money for it. What was funny about, I loved the first talk as a working capital fund. Well, I need a need for something first. A need turns into a requirement turns into some acquisition thing, an acquisition thing gets money, and the loop is closed. But if I can't establish the need, I can't establish the requirement, which means I can't get money for it. There's a hole in the bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. But so the question is then, who's going to invest IRAD dollars to come up with the capability to present? Once again, ManTech, Leidos, GDIT, whoever. Well, show me the pipeline, Chris. Show me where we can sell this product or deliver this capability. And if I have trouble establishing that, well, then it's hard for me to spend IRAD dollars against it. That's the world I'm living in now. All right. Yours truly wrote the one on the bottom left there. I'm very proud of that. The secretary, I forced the secretary to sign it on my last day in the job. So please sign, I've been writing this for 3 years, please sign it on my way out. He begrudgingly went, all right. And he signed it and I left. With a coin and a picture and the whole. But the point is, we waited to write our strategy until everybody had written their strategies because we were trying to do what is right. You know, hey, the Department of Defense is going to have a strategy, and then, or the President has one, and the Department of Defense has one, then there's a cyber one, and hey, we have to make sure we're nesting under that. Are we mapping back to the things that higher authorities are asking us to go do? Well, we were pretty diligent in doing that, and you put your little flair on it, you've emphasized some things specific to the Navy. But what you found is, and I know all of you know this, we could fill this room up with all the strategies. And I'm not just talking cyber. Every community has their strategy. Every community goes to somebody, hey, here's my strategy, fund this. Give me money to go execute, I'll get in line. Oh, Chris, you got a cyber strategy, good for you. You know, go put it against all the other things, the prioritizations in the Navy. But at least I had a cyber strategy, which I got. But again, this is a Sun Tzu line. For those of you who are not familiar, again, I'm not going to apologize for my stripes. Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, you're going to see Clausewitz quote in a minute. Look at strategy without, put a word in there. agreement, prioritization, resourcing. These strategies are only good if you can do all the other things required to implement a strategy. And that's sort of the pain that most of the people here in government, the people that represent their agencies, are probably experiencing with the OODA loop of how does industry then come and bang up against that. Again, it's a zero-sum game in some instances. But this is why these things are important. I used to have the Clausewitz quote memorized, so please read it. But basically what it says is, we are really, really good at this. Again, I'll quote the first gentleman who spoke. Delivering lethality as a service is something we are really good at. And we've only gotten better at it, and we're only going to continue to get better at it. Because I argue, and this is, you're going to hear me start to make my cyber version of what I'm about to go into next, is, look at, the job of the Department of Defense is basically twofold. One, deliver lethality. Two, prevent lethality from being delivered upon us or things we're trying to protect. Period. So, well, Chris, you get really, really aggressive with your offensive talk and all that. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. What does the Columbia-class submarine, the Joint Strike Fighter, and the Abrams tank all have in common? It's not cyber vulnerabilities. It's that none of those platforms were designed to deliver humanitarian aid. And it gets a laugh. It typically gets more of a laugh, but all right. But people, when they hear that, they reflect on it, and they go, oh yeah, that's right. Once again, if you're looking at the business end, again, reference the comment that was said in the beginning with that autonomous boat in the picture. Yeah, if you're looking at the pointy end of that, not a good day for you. If you're looking at the business end of an Abrams tank, not a good day for you. If you're looking at the business end of what a Columbia-class submarine is designed to do, it's really not a good day for anybody. But particularly where they go, and then it's Armageddon and whatever. But the point is, we're good at this, and we've continued to advance. And I found this graph a couple years ago. And I said, look, you know, from the time, what the x-axis, actually, I failed calculus, right? The y one, the one that goes up and down. The y-axis, I did fail calculus at the Naval Academy. What the y-axis shows is the ability to deliver lethality over a given time period. Let's call it an hour. And what the x-axis shows is sort of the historical evolution of weapons and warfare moving forward. You know, you see that we've gone from handheld weapons to missile weapons to, you know, the age of muscle, I can kill you with a sword, to the age of, you know, gunpowder, to the age of technology, and now we've sort of moved into this age of innovation, right? AI, ML, machine, you know, all of the things that we're basically talking about here. But the insert to the graph is the thing that I want you to look at and then reflect on as I move into the next couple slides. But the insert of the graph shows that even though we've gotten better at killing, destroying, delivering lethality, mortality rates in combat have actually been inversely proportional to our ability to deliver that lethality. Every conflict we've had, less people have died than the conflict before. Why? We didn't have to mass forces on each other. I could engage targets strategically. I could go after pinpoint things and you know, degrade your ability to conduct warfare, which means we didn't have to have the Battle of the Somme, where 1 million people died in 3 days for no apparent strategic advantage to either side. It was just a meat grinder. All right, well, Chris, once again, you're getting a little aggressive on this. Well, this is why I don't say security after the word, I say cyber, because I, at the time, represented the Department of Defense, and now I represent a company that mostly does work for the Department of Defense, and we focus in the areas that are a little more edgy. Well, how do I take these technologies and turn them into war-fighting capabilities? This is a conversation I've had at Purdue, it's a conversation I've had with other ManTech people, because look at, this is a domain of warfare. So even though I talk to students or I talk to technologies, the other interesting thing about this conversation is, it's no longer classified. What do I mean by that? When I was at Cybercom in 2008, working on the China OPT, would later deploy to Iraq and run mission in Iraq, you could not say the words computer network attack in a skiff. That's how sensitive this was. In a skiff, the NSA people would lose their mind if some knuckle dragger in a uniform started talking about offensive cyber. They would go bananas. And this was almost a, you know, we'll neither confirm or deny we do these things. That's circa 2008. Come 2009, because again, we worked at an organization at the time called the Joint Force Component Commander for Network Warfare. Well, what exactly do you think we do? Well, Chris, we can't talk about it. It's in our title. Like, what are we hiding from? It's literally in the last 2 words of our title, network warfare. And then JFCCNW and JTF-GNO came together to create US Cyber Command. And they kind of came up with their mission statement. A couple years later, we created the National Mission Force, or attempted, and there was an IOC and an FOC. But then they acknowledged, I think it was in 2016, their 3 fundamental areas. Defensive, DCO, defensive cyber operations, offensive cyber operations, and sort of net ops. Okay, we've acknowledged offensive cyber operations. What do you think those are? They're building weapons and capabilities to deliver effects, blah, blah, blah. I have a whole shtick I go off on that. But once again, we say, oh, Chris, we can't talk about these things, they're classified. Well, no, we can talk about them. And we use groups like this to talk about them. So for instance, I'll use the Columbia-class submarine as an example. Columbia-class submarine is arguably the most sensitive program in the Department of the Navy, is in the acquisition and development process right now. Many, many, many classified things about it. I have no idea how deep it goes, how quiet it is, or the range yield of actually its weapons are. Those are all very classified, sensitive things. But it's going to replace the Ohio-class submarine. It went underwater. This one's probably going to go underwater too. It's probably going to be quieter than the one that we built before because technology has gotten better, and we know it's going to carry nuclear weapons. What those nuclear weapons do and how, yeah, that's all very sensitive. But I talk about why I'm buying them, why it fits into the strategy, why I need $10 billion a copy to put it in the water, when I'm going to deliver them, blah, all of that is unclassified. And we have that conversation so industry can say, oh, maybe you have a way to do that. And then you go behind the green door to have certain conversations. But we talk openly about nuclear warfare. We're very the Joint Strike Fighter, to be in the cockpit of a Joint Strike Fighter, we need security clearance. We see them fly at air shows all the time anymore. Not a secret what it does. Hell, you play them in video games and they're pretty accurate even in video games. So this is what I'm saying, we have to figure out a way to have this conversation more with each other in a way that we can begin to collaborate using academia, using industry, using government. All right. I'm going to land on this for a minute. This is the crux of really what I wanted to get at. Depending on, perfect, good on time. Now, these 3 books tell a story, and what I think we need to do is tell a better story. Once again, I never went to anybody inside the Pentagon and started talking technical jargon with them because it would go over most people's heads, they wouldn't be interested. We had to tell a story. Now what these 3 books do, and again, Bomber Mafia, I should start getting royalties from Malcolm Gladwell because I swear to God he's selling more books, and Michael Lewis with Moneyball, and nobody's ever heard of the 3rd book, but you should read that as well. I string these together in this way. The first book is a visionary tale. Where could we be? What is a North Star? What could be an end state for the things we're trying to go do? The second book is Return on Investment book. That's kind of the one that most people in the audience that are working for industry or representing programs, here's your sort of financial argument for why you could pull this together. And the last book is a to scare you book. It's kind of what happens if we don't get this right. All right, book number 1, Bomber Mafia. Who has read Bomber Mafia? Right? Who's listened to Bomber Mafia? First of all, get the audiobook. Malcolm Gladwell wrote it to be listened to, so you have to listen. I read it before I listened to it. I listened to it on loop almost all the time. Driving to Crane, Indiana, I was listening to it back and forth. It's my catcher in the rye. It's my book that I go to all the time. What the book tells the story of, and you're going to hear me historically, right? That footnote, again, I really did fail calculus at the Naval Academy. I wanted to be a naval architect. That dream ended very quickly, to which point I played too much rugby, and I decided to major in graduation with a minor in history, which got me out of there by the skin of my teeth. But I learned to read, apparently, and it wasn't until many, many years later that I read, oh, these things that I read actually do have some sort of value, and there is a reason why I did this. All right, Bomber Mafia, 1920s, post-World War I, Battle of the Somme. The airplane was a toy. It was just the Sopwith Camel, the thing that Snoopy flew. And the Army was messing around with this thing. It was considered a toy. Nobody took it credit. Some congressman in the early 1920s, as the services were debating over buying airplanes, was actually, quote, overheard saying, just buy one airplane and let the services share it. That'll shut them up, right? That's what they thought of the airplane in the 1920s. Think about what the airplane is today. Joint Strike Fighter, $1.7 trillion program, B-21, $750 million a copy, blah, I could go on and on. But back then it was a toy. But there was a group of pilots that said, hey, if we could leverage this tool, this weapon system, in a way, I may be able to avoid another Battle of the Somme. Because if I could fly over these large battles, if I could drop bombs with accuracy onto targets, I could degrade somebody's ability to conduct warfare, which was kind of the theme of World War II, right, and strategic bombing. But in 1920, there was nothing that existed. But these group of pilots envisioned what they coined was high altitude, daylight precision bombing. That was their North Star. Nothing existed to do that at the time. Well, which led to the Norden bomb sight, which led to over the period of like 6 years, we went from the B-10 to the B-7. Like we were cracking out new airplanes in the early 1930s, like nobody's business. Other than the B-17, ultimately the B-29. But what happened? These airplanes would fly over targets, and they wouldn't get the hit rates that were promised or envisioned with the Norden bomb sight. 500 airplanes would fly over a target with millions of tons of bombs and get like 2% hit rates. So when you're trying to take a factory and put it to the ground, ball bearing factories, well, you weren't doing it. You're only covering minor damage, so the ball bearings are still in play, which means an engine could be built, which means an airplane could be built, which means the Germans are still putting out warfighting capability. So what happens? Curtis, B-29 finally gets out to Guam. We start flying actions against Japan. We're not hitting anything, because apparently in 1945, nobody knew the jet stream existed. That floored me, because nobody was ever flying that high. And now you're flying a bomber at 39,000 feet, trying to drop a bomb through 200-mile-an-hour winds. There were instances where the radar operator would say, actually, we're flying backwards. We're going 3 miles an hour backwards over a target. That's how strong the winds were. But you can't drop a bomb with accuracy. So Curtis LeMay comes in. Haywood Hansel, who's sort of the guy that I relate to, he gets fired. Curtis LeMay comes in and says, well, forget that. He tries it a couple times. But then he says, no, we're going to fly in low at night, and we're just going to firebomb things. I don't need to be accurate or high. If I'm going to fly in the dark, and I'm just going to burn cities to the ground. And over the next several months, he firebombed 68 cities. Was it July, whatever the date was, I can't remember it. The radon Tokyo, 16 square miles burned in 6 hours. The largest loss of life in any single engagement in warfare ever was that night. Commanded by a 34-year-old two-star general. Curtis LeMay was 30, could you imagine that, 34 years old when he was flying those missions out of Guam? That floors me. It's another thing that you think he's this old grizzled guy. No, he's 34. And he's now responsible for doing these bomber missions. So I reflect on that, but what the bomber mafia believed was that if we could do this more accurately, it could be a more moral way to do warfare. The U.S. vehemently opposed night bombing over Germany. We really pushed back hard on that because we said, no, it's completely against the doctrine that we're trying to pursue. Okay, so why do I say all that? Reflect the graph this graph that I just showed you. Right? I believe, my belief system, I'm not saying it has to be yours, that the introduction of all of these new non-kinetic things further bring that inset graph closer and closer to zero. If I could be more lethal to equipment, to technology, to degrade something's ability to come at me, I don't have to put a weapon on it. And it certainly can't put a weapon on me. So, again, I love stuff blowing up as much as the next guy. I did a lot of stuff in the military, did that. So I'm not saying I'm a pacifist or we shouldn't have weapon systems. What I'm saying is, why are we at least not giving this other thing a try? Because theoretically, when you start getting into cyber and all the things it enables, it's theoretically less expensive, it's theoretically quicker to market, and it's theoretically unconstrained by range. Those other two, quick to market, well, all three of them actually, again, weapon systems that need gas, that have to fly places, there's problems getting things we want to places they need to be. Right? Cyber, I think, and again, when I say cyber, it's sort of everything referenced in that. It's IW, it's electronic warfare, it's information operations, it's AI, it's ML, it's all that. So when I say cyber, I really mean everything that doesn't go boom. All right, Moneyball. Everybody's seen the movie, right? I can't imagine there's nobody that's seen the movie. Has everybody seen the movie? Can at least agree that everybody's seen the movie? Okay. All right. I love that movie. Again, my wife hates this movie because every single time it's on TV, wherever it is, I'm just caught up in it and I watch it to the end and she walks out of the room. Whatever, Moneyball's on. My two favorite scenes, and then there's one part of the book that I want to talk about. The first scene, when Brad Pitt is talking to Jonah Hill in the parking garage, and Jonah Hill's making basically the argument that he's making. And he's like, look, it's not about buying players, it's about buying wins. The U.S. military are the Yankees and the Red Sox combined. There is no player that we can't buy. Those players are called Ford, Columbia, Virginia, Joint Strike Fighter. We can put the players, the high-end players on the field. China read the Moneyball book 30 years ago. They're like, well, we can't compete that way. How else are we going to have to do this? Oh, you know what? I'll build a very inexpensive long-range hypersonic missile. I see you, your aircraft carrier. I raise you DF-21 and DF-26, a problem we are now forced to deal with. And they're doing it for pennies on the dollar. On top of that, all the other things with TikTok or cyber or money, they're playing a much different game than we are. The other one, at the end of the book, which is the argument that I like the most, which is why I'm surprised I'm not in a shallow grave yet, because when Brad Pitt is then talking to the owner of the Red Sox, the owner of the Red Sox is saying, you are fundamentally challenging the way this game is played. You've told everybody that they're doing it wrong, and you've done it through a spreadsheet. What the line, the Yankees paid $1.4 million per win, you paid $240,000, and you beat the Yankees. And then the Red Sox adopt that process. They win the championship the next year. They do it for pennies on the dollar. Cyber, AI, ML, autonomous system is the pennies on the dollar. It is buying wins. It's buying wins, which is buying runs. It's not buying players. I think that is the value proposition we're doing here. But once again, it fundamentally challenges the way the Department of Defense looks at warfare. It challenges the B-21. It challenges the Ford aircraft carrier. It challenges the Virginia-class submarine. Honeys and Ingalls will probably hit me with a car after this on my way out the door. Because if you can show, there's another good book. It's not one of these books. I also recommend it. It's called The Origins of Warfare, kind of long-range precision strike, blah, 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 blah. Admiral Nimitz is quoted in it 3 or 4 times. What Admiral Nimitz said about the obsolescence of weapon systems, it's not that a weapon system can be killed by another weapon system, is that there's another way to do what that weapon system does. Not that the battleships were necessarily obsolete, but a less expensive thing called the airplane that had higher sortie generation, longer ranges, could do all these other things, came and said, look, battleship's still cool. Hell, we brought them back into the Navy in the late 80s. And then got rid of them again. But there's another way to do that. And basically what the book is arguing is the development of hypersonics and long-range fires is kind of making some of these other weapon systems obsolete. We already see it moving with unmanned systems. Right? Unmanned systems are ultimately, it's only a matter of time that land from Top Gun, right? When the Admiral is kicking Tom Cruise out of the building, he's like, it's only a matter of time before your job goes away. And he's like, not yet. It is only a matter of time. It is moving in that direction. The other piece that when you read the book Moneyball, you learn something that is something that I've been trying to bring to the information warfare community for a long time. Because when they were trying to enforce their hitting philosophy on their players, this new hitting philosophy, it was actually a Marine colonel that was their batting coach. Interesting fact, didn't know that. But they had 3 rules they had to follow to implement this new strategy. So who are the baseball or has kids that play baseball here? Right, my son played for forever. Right, we all know the hitting lineup. The first 3 players are the ones designed to get on base. The next 3 players, your power hitters, are the ones that are supposed to put the ball over the fence. The next 3 players are your great fielders that are probably going to strike out anyways, but you got to have them in the lineup, right? That's the way the lineup is usually established. Because the philosophy changed, their hitting rules changed. And again, there were 3 of them. The first rule was you had to come to the plate with the attitude that you're a leadoff hitter. Your job is to get on first base. That's it. Your job is not to put the ball over the fence. Your job is to get on first. Rule number 2. But you have to have demonstrated that you can hit with power. Because the pitcher has to be afraid to give you your pitch. So if I give you your pitch, it's going over the fence. And then rule number 3 was, it was basically, you could teach a person with a good eye to be a stronger hitter, but you couldn't necessarily teach a stronger hitter to have a better eye. And basically it was about discipline at the plate. Because if your pitcher's afraid to give you your pitch, he's going to make you chase things, and if you're not chasing him, you have a higher likelihood of being walked. Again, you got on first. I don't care how you got there. You got from home plate to first place. Now you're in the game. Now you can potentially score a run. All right, why do I say any of that? Because when I go back to the information warfare community with the advent of cyber as a means and methods of warfare, hey, information warfare community, again, I'm saying this to sort of all the communities, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, doesn't matter. You need to come to the plate like you're a leadoff hitter. Information warfare, you're not a base coach, you're not a talent scout, you're not up in the rafters keeping the lights on, you're in the lineup. You need to act that way. But you have to demonstrate you can hit with power. Go back to my credibility argument on the first one. If you're not credible, if you're not a credible hitter, the pitcher will throw you the ball underhand. They'll let you put it on a tee, you're going to get knocked out, right? You're not afraid of it. So you have to demonstrate you can hit with power. And then the third rule I always mess around with a little bit, which is to say it's much more of a mental than a physical game, which brings in other elements of power, which is information operations and cognitive warfare. You don't necessarily have to hit the ball at all. To say, this goes into another Clausewitz line. We all know that warfare is the application of the continuation of politics or other means. But in that same chapter, Clausewitz defines warfare. Warfare is the application of force to compel my adversary to do my will. Well, what is force today? Like there's many, force in his day was I'm on a horse with a saber and a musket and a cannonball. Look, force Like you might even want to rewrite Clausewitz now because the whole definition of what is force has changed. If I'm simply convincing you to do what I want, is TikTok force? Right? I mean, if I'm just, is media manipulation force? Is deep? If I just convince everybody in the United States that Taiwan's just not worth it, and we all say we don't care, well, there you go. They've achieved their objective. They didn't have to fire a shot. Is that warfare? I would argue that it is. We don't see it that way. We see warfare as kinetic. We're not at war until you've shot at me. With the introduction of all these other things, I argue that all day long. All right, the last book. This is the book that's supposed to scare you. This is the one that I'm going to keep you all. This is the much more interesting book. It's a boring book unless you're into the subject. All right, lead up. December 7th, 1941. Again, I'm going to go back to the 1920s for this. Well, we're going to start at 41, and then I'm going to go back 20 years. December 7th, 1941. Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. 4 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt, backed by Admiral Stark, who was the chief of Naval Operations at the time, issued an order. And it simply said, execute against Japan. Now, you might say, well, duh, Chris, they just bombed us in Pearl Harbor. And I'd say, okay, well, what does execute against Japan mean? What it meant was, you are now cleared to engage in unrestricted submarine and air warfare against the island, against the Emperor of Japan. All right, now you got to back up 20 years. In the 1920s, again, a similar time, we were arguing over lots of things in the 1920s. In 1923, the US Navy went to one of these naval conventions and was arguing for the abolishment of the submarine. We at that time thought the submarine was an immoral, illegal, unethical means and methods of warfare. We thought the way the Germans used it in World War I was abhorrent. It's not gentlemanly. You're seeking after killing merchants. What are you doing? Right? Well, they were going after war material that we thought there was a better way to do that. So what we said for leading up right to December 7th, 1941, is that we were going to conform to a thing called cruiser warfare. What is cruiser warfare? Well, cruiser warfare says if you have an established area of hostilities, and you're in there, you're a U.S. flagship or submarine, and a non-military combatant, belligerent, comes into the area, you're going to stop it, and you're going to search it. And if it was carrying bread and bananas, you're going to send it on its way. If you're carrying war material, you're going to do a couple things. You're either going to turn it out of the area, or you're going to sink it. But if you're going to sink it, you're going to provide the crew quarter. The crew is going to be taken off. They're going to go on the fantail of your ship. They're going to be fed tea and biscuits, and they're going to watch their ship go to the bottom of the ocean. And then you're going to put them ashore at your earliest convenience and provide them safe passage. That's how we were going to do it. That's how we trained our forces. The submarine community had a real problem with this because, like, well, if I come to the surface to do this, I'm very vulnerable up here, right? So it was hard for the submarine community to do this. So what happened? Execute against Japan, conduct unrestricted submarine warfare. So just like that, we said anything with a white flag and a red circle goes to the bottom. And we embraced unrestricted warfare. We took it into our soul. The Germans still have the record of over World War I and World War II. They sank about 14 million tons of merchant shipping. In World War II, the U.S. in just a couple of years sank almost 5 million tons of Japanese shipping in a very short time period. We were really, really good at it. As a matter of fact, for those of you who live in the Baltimore area, like I do, I don't know if anybody does, the USS, the submarine in Baltimore, the none will come to me in a second, is actually the last submarine that ever fired a war shot. And that was actually 3 days after the war ended, and they sank a couple merchant ships. Strangely enough, the war was over, they just didn't know. That is the last time we have fired a torpedo in anger. It was August 8th, 1945. We have not fired a torpedo in anger, with the exception of one other time where apparently we dropped one from an airplane against a dam in the Korean War. So it wasn't even at another ship. But outside of that, we haven't done undersea, warfare. We spend millions and millions of dollars on torpedoes every year. We don't use them. My argument is we're kind of in this cyber fight every single day, and we have to sort of walk around with our hat out to try and justify expenditures in this. Now, the reason I say this last book is sort of a, hey, should wake you up kind of thing, and this is where I look like the crazy uncle of the Navy when I was on the inside, because I was a big advocate for unrestricted warfare because of the ways it could be done, particularly in cyber, which was, this is how the Chinese think. Reflect the very first slide I show you, Volt Typhoon, they're in our infrastructure. There's no intelligent value to be in somebody's critical infrastructure. There's nothing that China is going to go to Baltimore Gas and Electric and find out that they couldn't just go to Schneider Electric and buy for themselves or build for themselves. There's no intelligence value to be there. Because you'll just go to the person who built it, write them a check, and they'll make you that in Shanghai. right? The only reason you're there is if you're conducting sort of preparation of the battle space, so I want to turn that power off. That's it. It's the only reason you're there. And I would argue you've crossed a line if I found you in my infrastructure. It's like finding somebody with a hood in your bedroom. What are you doing here? Oh, I was just looking around. Right? What's the mask for? Whoa, well, it was cold, right? You know, no, right? And we fail to make these arguments in such a way because if the balloon goes up, when the balloon goes up, everything with an IP address is on the table from their perspective. All of you are legitimate military targets. Now, why do I say that? Because, oh, Chris, you know, we're just a defense contractor, or I'm a DFAS. Well, you push all the money around, trust me, you're probably a really sweet target 30, 60 days prior to conflict, because you would love for the DoD not to be paid and somebody can't buy milk or diapers, right? That would really, and now you're getting 400,000 phone calls to the fleet trying to say, whoa, what do you mean your ATM card doesn't work, right? There's no, that would cause all kinds of pain and discontent. Look at the other things that you provide. If you provide a service to the Department of Defense, you are a legitimate military target. And I mean to include kinetic actions. Now you say, well, that's not a problem because I'm separated by oceans. What can they do to me? Well, yeah, you might have to worry about kinetic, but you certainly have to worry about non-kinetic. Your intellectual property being stolen, some cyber attack to degrade what it is that you do that supports us. So you're completely in play. And that's why when you do go back to the zero trust, CMMC, look, they're all their pluses and minuses, their strengths and weaknesses. I could argue CMMC against it all day long, but the point is, we're trying to do better. Zero trust is trying to do better. Moving away from, because what we were talking about just 2 years ago was comply to connect, and 2 years before that it was this, and then it was firewalls, and it was intrusion detection systems, and it was virus, the very first day, virus protection. Zero trust is not the last thing we're going to talk about. There'll be something in 2 years. Once quantum's introduced, there'll be some other way to talk about this, right? And then we would have just written the zero trust strategy, which is, again, we'll have the strategy slide for it, and we'll roll out 40% of it, and then we'll stop and we'll start doing whatever the next thing is, because that's unfortunately what we do. So again, I pull these 3 books, these 3 stories. I could go further on all of them. But again, it's telling a story. The point that you made, sir, you say, look, you got to have a use case in your head, right? And Gene Price, who was my mentor, who's taking a phone call, who was a 2-star admiral, worked for me oh, there he is. Oh, he's in the back. I wanted you to hear this because he's heard most of it, by the way, and actually helped me shape some of it. So I hope I did you a little proud anyways, by the way. We need to articulate this in a way that's just not technology. Couldn't agree with you more. You needed to give the why, Simon Sinek, the why. The why are we trying to do all these things? So I ended with this, and this is probably more of my North Star, again, to industry. At the end of the day, the Department of Defense makes nothing. They don't make shoelaces, bullets, ships, armaments, software. All of that comes from industry. We buy it all, we put the requirements out there for all of it. They don't make any of it. Software is a very small exception. So cyber is a warfighting domain. It must be a core competency. I could talk for another 2 hours about whether we should have a cyber service or not. Put pin in there, and that'll be my next talk. And you will deliver the environment. Me, now ManTech, now I will also help deliver the environment. But working with the customer, the Department of Defense, showing that these tools are credible. And I think for when we start thinking about the North Star with developing cyber tools, it should look something like this. That I can present you a capability that is credible, does what it says it can do 80% of the time, making that number up. Can be synchronized with other things. Now a pilot can understand it, a tanker can understand it. Oh, I can call for this and then the last one will be on call. The tool has to be available when they need it, not when you can provide it. So if I can present a capability that does what it says it does, hey, you can use it in conjunction with other things and it's available when you need it. We've met, that's the goose laid the golden egg. But that's so far out. And because the last thing I'll say, two more minutes, is, now go back to the Norden bomb site just for a minute. Put yourself back in 1942. What if the Norden bomb site worked exactly as advertised? What if the Norden bomb site could hit everything that it aimed at? What if 500 bombers rolling over a target got 97% hit rates on that target? The war would have been over in 1942, because we would have bombed Germany in the Stone Age. But we didn't give up on that. It's the only way we deliver munitions now is with accuracy. Precision munitions. That's trivial now. Again, we're getting really, really good at it. We're only going to get better at it. So my North Star, my cyber mafia moment, is the precision daylight high altitude. I would argue in this space it's credible synchronized on call. It might be different words, you can challenge me with this. This is a thought experiment. I'm just throwing this out there as sort of red meat. I don't profess to be right about any of this. Once again, I said rant in the beginning, right? This is just a stream of consciousness based on what I observed and sort of my experiences. I think I have one more. All right, this is the last one. I was talking to a bunch of students when I gave this slide, and again, this is the Shackleton quote, which, you know, when they went on that last expedition, he said, look, this is what you're getting into, right? You might not come back. A lot of this cyber stuff, if you come into it, when I was talking to students at Purdue and brand new midshipmen and ensigns, if you get into this space, the book is not written. It's kind of a quagmire. You're going to be frustrated. People don't completely understand what you're doing. But if you kind of get into this game knowing it's going to be hard, you can all get and stick together and lock arms and work your way through this. And I think this is where that would be my industry, academia, government. Hey, none of this is easy. We all know that we fight against much larger requirements outside of this space. But if we lock arms, sort of go on this together and acknowledge it's not a zero-sum game. We're going to win some. You know, GDIT is going to win some. ManTech's going to lose some. ManTech's going to win more than GDIT, I hope, moving forward. No offense to GDIT, right? They're a great company. They are a great company. They are a great company. All right, so with that, I'm going to shut down to my last slide. No? Yep. Last slide. So with that, thank you. I'm around for a little bit if anybody has any questions. Any questions? You can yell at me.
I could probably just talk.
Yeah.
So as you talk about like the cyber environment that we're currently in, and you do have things that are like of TikTok, and you have your phishing, you have your it doesn't stop with the bad actors and trying to gain data and do different things with that. Is there something that can be done to help people protect themselves, right? I can't protect them from giving away their own passwords, their own emails.
No,
what else can we do?
Well, so this is a good one, right? And I make an analogy with the fire department because the government does have some skin in the game here. So I said, look, everybody in this room is an ambulatory humanoid with opposable thumbs. We heard the fire alarm go off just a few minutes ago, right? We all were able to get out of here if we needed to. And if it was a small fire and there was a fire extinguisher, we were all probably reasonably expected to put that out. But if we walked out in the lobby and the building's on fire, well, even if there was a room full of fire extinguishers, well, that's not we're not clear to do that. That's what the fire department, that they're man-trained and equipped to do this thing. But what it means is you shouldn't play with matches, you shouldn't leave oily rags around, the building should be built to code, we should have fire alarms and fire suppression, all of those things should exist. But what I'm getting at is, this is kind of where I push back on John Easterly just a little bit with if we could only build it better, right? Build secure by design. Well, what does that mean? Because if I have a requirement to stay dry, and my requirement to stay dry is for my 10-year-old daughter, well, I'm going to go to Target, I'm going to buy her a rubber, raincoat, I'm going to stick her out in front of the school bus, and she's going to go to school. I'm not sending her to the Amazon or to the Arctic. If that does happen, I'm going to REI, and I'm spending $5,000 on something that's going to keep me alive, right? But they both keep you dry. So the question is, what am I expecting any industry to be able to do? And I shouldn't expect an industry that finds himself in the crosshairs of China to withstand that. You should be better, but what we're never going to do is build the perfect mousetrap where China's going to go, oh, they rolled out zero trust? Well, I guess they're off. We're not going to bother with them anymore, right? If you're a high-value target, no, they're going to figure out a way in. They're going to get there. So I guess my point is that when we talk about, yes, you should teach people to change their passwords and all the things you'd want your grandmother to do. But my grandmother's never going to be in the target hairs of China. But GDIT is, ManTech is, DFAS is. That's a whole different set of whacks. And where is the fire department? Where is that number that you call? And then I think that's the next thing that we really need to do is there's got to be some kind of response service that's established to help you with these things. Because I can't expect you, if you won the lottery, I wouldn't say, go buy a fire engine and put it in your driveway. And we're not going to respond to your call anymore because you won the lottery and you own a fire engine, so good luck, right? You're off the 911 call list. We wouldn't do that. I think that's kind of this misnomer that we can just build our way out of this. It's never going to happen.
Any other questions?